First up is Ballerina from the world of John Wick, and this stars Ana de Armas as an assassin named Eve. It takes place during the third John Wick film, and if for whatever reason you're unfamiliar, the John Wick films star Keanu Reeves. He plays a character called John Wick, who is also an assassin, who lives in this complicated clandestine world where there are all these rules and there's a hotel system and there's a hierarchy amongst assassin clans and all this stuff. Now, do you have to have seen the John Wick films in order for Ballerina to make sense? I'm honestly going to say technically no. Ballerina does a decent job of just being like, we're going to fast track you to give you all the base level info you need. Now, if you've seen the John Wick films, there's a lot more Easter eggs and homages and references that you're going to get versus a general audience. I took a friend who had only seen the first John Wick film. And I think, obviously, again, helpful to have seen all of them. But even having only seen the first one, he was totally fine in terms of following the plot, enjoyment levels, all that stuff. This is not a film that's asking a ton of you. I think Ana de Armas is a fine actress. I think she's great in Knives Out. Her moment in the James Bond film No Time to Die, I was like, oh, yes. She's fantastic, but she's also worked on some things that have me raising eyebrows. I think Ghosted was real tough. I know she was in The Gray Man. And so I wasn't sure if she could carry a film like this. And I think maybe the studio also was a little afraid because, the John Wick franchise is important to them. And so they made sure that John Wick was in this film. And you can feel the moments where you're like, ooh, I think this was added because they went, we need some more Keanu in here. Is this a bad thing? No. Give me Keanu on screen any day of the week. Totally great. I think the action in this film, these films are made by people who started out in stunts and action and all that stuff. So no matter what, you're going to get an elite level of performance when it comes to that stuff. I often think that they sit in front of a drawing board and go, what have we not done yet in terms of fights or choreography, etc.? And then they build the plot around that, which, I think Ballerina moves along very quickly. It's 2 hours. It didn't feel particularly longer than that. There are a couple things I probably could have cut out in terms of setup and backstory and all this stuff. But overall, I had a good time at it. I think they do a good job of catering and creating a distinct physical fighting style for her versus having her trying to be, exactly the same as what Keanu is doing and stuff like that. They play to the strengths and weaknesses of the physicality of the character, which is, of course, they're going to do that. There are pros at this. We also see the return of Ian McShane as Winston, Angelica Houston as the director. These will mean absolutely nothing to you if you have not seen the other films. Like I said, it does not matter, though, because this movie is going to give you all that info you need. Gabriel Byrne and Norman Reedus join the franchise through this one. Overall, it's a solid film. It is very violent. So if you are someone who doesn't like violence, isn't particularly compelled by action films, this one doesn't exactly have an emotional core to it that I'm going to go, no, overlook those inherent biases you have and go see this film. I will say that about the original John Wick films. I love those ones and I will try and convert everyone to them. This is certainly a solid entry into the John Wick universe. I don't have maybe the same affinity for it that I do for the Keanu-led ones. That's also possibly just because I love Keanu this much, and this one is also shortcutting a little bit in that they expect you or, are guessing that if you are a fan of the other ones, they will get to ride the coattails of that in order to help you enjoy this one more. And so it's in that kind of weird middle ground. But like I said, you could totally watch this film not having seen the other ones and still understand what's going on. Now, should you do that? No, I'm going to say start with John Wick. And then if you love the John Wick films, then get into Ballerina. And I do know there are people out there, my friends included, who are just like, yeah, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I have no problem with it. But I don't think Ballerina is where you start. So, like I said, if you are already averse to this type of thing, I'm going to say try John Wick first, and then maybe you'll get hooked and watch this. If you are already in the Wick-iverse, you're going to enjoy this film. It's good. It's, fun. Again, you get to see Keanu in it. Ana de Armas is totally fine. She fits into this world that they've created. Ian McShane, always a delight. If you are on the fence and you're like, I love the John Wick films, but I don't know if Ballerina is going to be for me. Yeah, of course it's going to be for you. It's almost exactly the same as the other John Wick films, except for it's Ana de Armas. And like I said, they were sure to go, you know what? Let's just make sure that Keanu is in this enough that no fan of the John Wick franchise only will complain about this is too far removed. Now, are they going to be able to sustain this type of thing as they continue to expand the John Wick universe? I'm not sure. If you have seen all of the John Wick films, you'll understand. But we're going to see what's going on here. I still think this was a solid entry. I enjoyed it. I was already somebody who was inclined to enjoy it, so I acknowledge that bias, but overall, I'm going to give it a 3.8 out of 5. The next film I have is The Phoenician Scheme, and this is the latest film from Wes Anderson, and I will caveat with, in the way that I am a John Wick person, I have become not particularly a Wes Anderson person. Now, do I admire and respect and enjoy his earlier films? Absolutely. I think Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou is a top film for me. Do I think that Wes Anderson has become so derivative of himself and is putting style over substance over and over and over again? Yeah, we're at that stage. I think especially after his last two features with The French Dispatch and Asteroid City, my patience for Wes Anderson has grown thin, and so I was not particularly excited going into The Phoenician Scheme. Now, did it have more of a plot than the other ones? Sure, yes, which was one of my biggest beefs with something like, again, they technically have plots, but I was just getting bored. It feels like more vignette-ish. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but when it becomes so repetitive and it becomes like he's stuck in his own style and no longer able to move past it and yet isn't improving on it, even within the sub-style, then it becomes boring. And I'm like, well, then I would just rather watch your earlier work, which I resonate more with. So The Phoenician Scheme stars Benicio del Toro, Mia Thrapleton, Michael Cera, Riz Ahmed, Tom Hanks, Bryan Cranston, Richard Ayoade, Jeffrey Wright, Scarlett Johansson, Benedict Cumberbatch, Rupert Friend, Hope Davis, Alex Jennings, Stephen Park, F. Murray Abraham, Charlotte Gainsborough, Willem Dafoe, and Bill Murray. Yes, I realize that, yes, he's Wes Anderson. At this point, he commands these types of ensemble casts. The challenge with the ensemble casts is that you only get to see them usually for a moment or two. You get like 3 seconds with Bill Murray or whatever it is. That's a mild exaggeration. But so don't go into it on the basis of, I like this one actor. You have to know that it is an ensemble. I will say Benicio del Toro is the core of this one. He plays a character called Zaza Corda, who is a businessman who deals in sketchy and questionable business practices. Mia Thrapleton plays his daughter, who is also a nun. And then Michael Cera plays an employee of his, and it's about him trying to negotiate this effectively scheme called the Phoenician Scheme and get people bought in on it. And like I said, that plot is not something that is inherently interesting to me on its own. And then in Wes Anderson's hands, it did not do more for me than already this baseline. If you are a huge Wes Anderson fan, I know you're going to go see this movie anyway. That's fine. I am not here to dissuade you per se, but it's certainly a low-ranking one for me. His newer films have yet to impress me in a way that his earlier work did and had an impact on me. The plot is middling at best. The performances are very stylized, which again, if you've seen Wes Anderson films, you're used to at this point, but it's wearing so thin on me. I think Michael Cera probably gives the most fun or a dynamic performance out of any of the characters, but he's also Michael Cera in it, to a degree. And so I'm like, are we really casting that far outside of the skill sets of these actors? I don't know. It's also muted that I find myself bored by these films. I would love to see Wes Anderson push himself and do something outside of his comfort zone, but because we're in this sort of stagnant, repetitive period, this was not for me. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5. The next film I have is called Dangerous Animals, and this stars Jai Courtney, Josh Houston, and Hassie Harrison, and conceit-wise, terrifying film for me. So it is about a shark-obsessed serial killer who uses sharks basically to dispose of the bodies, which is honestly pretty brilliant in terms of a way to dispose of bodies. Unfortunately, poor Hassie Harrison plays a character called Zephyr, who is taken captive by him. And Josh Houston is a civilian who is also caught up in the situation. I think Jai Courtney gives a really unhinged and scary performance in this. He is, I think, the best part of this film. Now, I, based on the trailers, was potentially maybe expecting something that was a little more camp, and that may have been what I was more interested in. I'm talking about like a Sharktopus or a Sharknado scenario, which I knew in my heart going into it, it was not going to be that, but that is maybe what I was hoping for. But then by the same token, it is not necessarily as terrifying as I thought it was going to be, which is a weird in between, right? Because I think there's a slasher horror film, thriller horror film in here that hardcore audiences who gravitate towards that would have preferred maybe and like wanted it to go above and beyond. There's an almost not tameness, groundedness to this. And yes, I know it is a completely absurd scenario where this myth is luring people onto a boat and then, using sharks to kill them. That is hopefully an absurd scenario, but it treats it in a way that is actually pretty self-serious. And I almost think maybe it does itself a tiny bit of disservice in doing that. I would have liked to see a hyperbolic version of this one. I respect what they're going for. And again, I think because of Jai Courtney's performance, it works at the end of the day. But if you're watching it going, I think this is going to be a ridiculous Shark Week film, no, it's not that. Or if you want this to be like a Halloween or a Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something along those lines, or even like a Saw, I think Saw is a decent comparison. It's not quite to the same level of those films either. However, if you are someone who is not averse to that genre of thriller, horror, scary, I think this is a pretty solid film. If you are someone who is terrified of sharks, this is not for you, certainly. I am not a fan of sharks, and I am not a fan of serial killers in that sense. So I was like, well, I'm very scared by this. Congratulations, film, you succeeded. I think some of the other performances maybe are not quite as strong as Jai Courtney's is, but I did see this with an audience, and it is one that if you're gonna go see it, if you watch the trailer, you're gonna get the vibe. If you were inclined to go see it, I'm gonna say yes, go ahead and do it. If you were on the fence, maybe you wait. But I did see this with a crowd, and this is one of those ones where if you are in a place emotionally you can handle the film, seeing it with a group of people who are going to be reactive, I think enhances the experience because you get the oohs and the ahs and the oh no's at the appropriate times. Overall, I had a decent time. I'm going to give this a 3.4 out of 5. The last film I have is called Predator, Killer of Killers, and this is within the Predator universe. It is from Dan Trachtenberg, who did Prey, which I think is the best Predator film out there. It's also co-directed by Joshua Wasung. So this is an animated film within the Predator universe, and if you're not familiar with the Predator universe, one, this is not going to be where you start, but they are an alien species who their whole thing is proving themselves through fighting the most powerful creature in a food chain or whatever you want to call it. So the animated film is a kind of like anthology that comes together of these 3 humans throughout different eras in time who have faced off against predators, and they're then brought together and forced to face an even more challenging threat. I guess they've proven themselves by taking down predators, and so the predator species is like, we're going to challenge you even further. I think the animation style is very cool, very violent. This was a very violent week for reviews, between Ballerina and Dangerous Animals. Phoenician Scheme, not that violent. A little bit peppered in there. But yeah, I was really impressed by it. I think if you temper your expectations and you know what you're getting into with this, you're going to be really satisfied. And I say temper your expectations in the same way that, I don't want you to pick Ballerina as your first John Wick film. I don't want you to pick Predator, Killer of Killers as your first Predator film. I want you to pick Prey as your first Predator, adjacent film, because I think that is such a good movie. But yeah, so this is not the one you start with if you were unfamiliar with the Predator franchise, right? Do I think it is one of the more outstanding things within the Predator franchise? Absolutely. I think you hand the reins of this entire thing to Dan Trachtenberg for as long as he wants to keep playing in this universe, because he is doing a great job. I do think it is trying to infuse moments of, emotion and impact and stuff like that. I think in those moments it accomplishes it, but then it goes, oh yeah, we're a Predator film. We got to get back to the, kind of core of what we are known for, which it does very well, I think also because it's animated and there are things you can achieve that are not going to look as ridiculous as if you tried to do against photoreal humans, that they are like, we're going to go buck wild here. And so you're going to see some messed up stuff, but it's an alien. And so you don't feel as bad about it, I guess. Also, they're monsters who are hunting humans / the most powerful thing within their purview. Like, you're not supposed to feel bad for the predators. Overall, I very much enjoyed this film. I am also inclined to enjoy this film if you are averse to gore and guts, etc. Not for you. I don't think it's scary in the same way I find sometimes the original Predator film scary, because the way the Predator characters are designed, they can camouflage, they can do all this, like there's more of a sense of dread. I think this one, they were more like, let's get to the fighting. So it's not quite as suspenseful as some of the other ones, but I think there are very creative, violent outlets in it, and it moves along, and I still enjoyed it overall. I thought it was cohesive. Like I said, if you had to start somewhere in the Predator universe, start with Prey. But I think if you are inclined to watch things within this world, this is a great entry into it. I'm going to give it a 3.7 out of 5.